Behind the Mirror of Music with Dannii Cohen.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Mirror of Music. My name is Dannii Cohen. Today's guest is Ron Bohmer. In this week's Phantom of the Opera special, we dive even deeper into the world of Phantom, discussing the original novel, the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, as well as the Kopit and Yeston production, and the character and psyche of Erik himself. Ron Bohmer was the Phantom in the first American tour. There he met his current wife, Sandra Joseph, who was his Christine in the production. Ron also performed the role of Erik in the Kopit and Yeston version of Phantom. Sandra joined him there as well. Next to his various Phantom incarnations, Ron is also known for his leading roles both on Broadway and touring productions in Scarlet Pimpernel, Aspects of Love, Sunset Boulevard, The Woman in White, Sunday in the Park with George, Les Miserables, A Little Night Music, Fiddler on the Roof, and many more. More recently, Ron and Sandra use their Phantom history in their keynote speeches, where they speak and sing about overcoming obstacles, dropping the mask, and practicing presence over perfection. I hope you will enjoy the show.
Hi,
Hi,
how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Look at your collection back there. You've got quite a few Phantom items, I see.
Yes,
That's nice. Well, thank you for asking me to talk to you today. This is going to be fun.
I'm glad you're joining.
Yeah, I'm ready if you
Okay.
are. Let's dive in.
What are you doing right now in your life and career?
Really, since the pandemic, we have refocused. I say we. I don't know if you or any of your viewers are familiar, but I am married to Sandra Joseph, who was my Christine in when I joined the national tour of Phantom of the Opera, and we fell in love and married, and we have been together for close to 30 years now, married for a good portion of that, and when the pandemic hit, I was on tour. I was doing the Book of Mormon. I was playing Joseph Smith and Jesus Christ in the Book of Mormon. And I had been doing it for about 7 years, a long time, which is really unusual. You know, being an actor requires a fair amount of sacrifice, a stage actor in particular, when you join these big musicals like Phantom of the Opera, like Sunset Boulevard, Les Mis, some of the shows I've been lucky enough to do. It's a commitment. You sign on usually for a year, and so it's a big part of your life, and it's 6 days a week. You work constantly. So after 7 years of touring with Book of Mormon, which I loved, loved, loved doing that show. It was so much fun, and was so grateful to be a part of something funny, to give people, genuine laughs every single night. But it was a lot. It was a big sacrifice, and Sandra and I struggled to find time to see each other. She had written her book, Unmasking What Matters, which you can get on Amazon, which is the subtitle is 10 life lessons, 10 life lessons from 10 years on Broadway. And it is somewhat autobiographical about her time at Phantom, but it's really more of a self-help kind of book about learning to overcome fear and become your authentic self. And she became keynote speaker and started speaking for organizations, corporations all around the country. And what we would often do is we would end the show. We would try to book the shows on Mondays, her shows on Mondays, so that I could have my day off and fly to whatever city she was performing in. And we would end the show with me being a surprise guest and come out and we would perform the title song from Phantom of the Opera as the final piece of the show. Um, and we love doing them, and they're so much fun. It was great being our own boss, not having to, be a part of a large show that was traveling, but just be our own thing. So we kind of, when the pandemic hit and Book of Mormon shut down, we really sort of reevaluated, like, what do we want to do with our lives, going forward from this point. And we decided to expand our keynote business and make me more a part of that show. So now we both speak on the topic of authenticity. We use stories from Phantom of the Opera. We use stories from our Broadway careers, our stage careers, to reinforce this message of learning how to really show up as your genuine self, that the greatest strength that we all have is our authenticity. And how do we, especially in a world now with social media being people projecting their perfect image on Instagram, I always think it's funny when you meet somebody that you've never met before that you only know from Instagram, and they're entirely different from what they have put forward, because that's what we do. We put our best, most polished face and self out there in that image. And we have sort of gotten in our society into this sort of perfectionism thing. And our keynotes that we give to companies, to corporations, to charities, different organizations, which involves singing, of course. We do things from Phantom of the Opera. But the message is really that the greatest strength we have is our authentic self, to get down to exactly who you are and trust that that is the greatest gift you can give the world, and that's the greatest gift you can give to anybody you encounter, anyone you connect with. And that's become kind of our mission of the last few years. I have not retired from theater, although I have scaled way, way back. But I find that now committing to do 8 shows a week is something that I'm not that into anymore, especially when I can do one show and do it with my favorite person on the planet and bring those same messages home. And yet, in a strange sort of way, we're both still keeping those characters that we met playing alive, because we do perform scenes from Phantom in the show, not actual scenes, but songs. And we use those messages in a different sort of way to reinforce what I believe is the story behind the Phantom of the Opera, which is, behind the mask for all of us, we're all struggling with a sense of, am I enough? Would someone love me if they saw me without this mask? And our message is, you are in fact more than enough, and that is exactly what the world deserves, is exactly who you are. So that's become kind of our mission of the last 5 years, and we love it. It's a lot of fun.
Really interesting, because in mental health, especially the autism ADHD community, the one thing we call being yourself is unmasking.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that is the metaphor that we share with that community, because I do think it really is about learning. Wearing a mask can be amazing. I mean, as a fan of Phantom of the Opera, what a powerful story that is. When the Phantom first encounters Christine in the lair, he's trained himself into this image of perfection, with his hair slicked back and the mask and all of these things to make himself. Hal Prince, who directed the original productions, said his image is Rudolph Valentino, of this just sort of perfect, poised, graceful, sexy human being, that he wants to present to Christina, and he does. And yet he finishes Music of the Night, this practiced, polished thing that he's done. The next morning happens. She's convinced underneath that mask he must be the most beautiful human being on the face of earth, because his ruse has worked. And when she playfully goes to remove the mask and reveals it, he is literally reduced to what he believes he truly is, which Hal Prince used to call it, he's reduced to a mewling, puking infant who is filled with nothing but self-loathing. And there's some measure, I think, in all of us, that we are afraid that we will be viewed in that way, that we will be viewed as unworthy. And I think the great message of this beautiful show, which has transcended, had a life unlike any other piece of theater ever has. The great message of that is that Christine basically, in the end, learns to love the Phantom all that he is, and show him love, show him compassion. Pitiful creature of darkness. Yes. Her quote is, you're not, give me the courage to show you you're not alone. And it changes his life. He doesn't know what to do with it. He's never felt that kind of love before, And I really believe, of course, the music is stunning. Of course, the sets are gorgeous. The performances, everything, on so many levels, it's an incredible piece of theater. But at the end, I think why people respond to it is I think we all struggle with that feeling inside ourselves of, am I enough? Am I worthy of love? And I think the show says, yes, you are.
I think that in the book he says, then after she kisses him, I've tasted all the happiness the world can offer, and that is just such a powerful line.
It's so powerful. Had read the novel. I'd seen the production many times before I was cast in the role, and not many times. I saw it 3 times. I saw it in New York, probably about 3 years into the run was the first time I saw it. And then I also was lucky enough to see Colm Wilkinson do it up in Toronto. And Colm really, really shaped my idea of what, if I ever got a chance to play the role, what I wanted to do. I just thought his performance was so incredible. But it was really the novel that opened the door for me. I was somewhat mystified by the story, the way the story is told in the Andrew Lloyd Webber version. It's very much a mystery, and it unfolds very slowly that we find out who this man is, where he came from, what is he, how is he doing the things that he's doing, is he a ghost, is he a man, what is he? And it was really the novel that sort of opened the door to me, that made me understand, oh, this is someone who has created this persona after years and years and years of, living in the basement of the opera house, being part of a carnival, all these different things where he was literally treated as a slave or as a caged animal in those days, and found a way to put himself in a position of power by creating the illusion and the story of the opera ghost. And even the people who don't believe it in the story, they still believe it a little bit. They're still afraid. Because he has used fear to gain power, to have a control over the opera house. And in the end, that all comes crashing down, but then he gains something that he's never had in his life, the most important thing that anyone can gain, which is the sense of being seen and being loved for who he truly is.
That's true, because there's something that's when you have lived a life, like I found my first version of Phantom when I was a teenager, and had a really difficult time at school, and that's when I really felt, well, actually, if Erik was with me and protecting me in some way, because he understood.
Wow. Yeah, I think we all relate to that sense of what it's like to feel alone, to feel abandoned, and with finding community in this life is so important. I think it's part of what I always loved about theater. I have families all over the world now. I have my own family. You can see a picture of them behind me here. My daughters and Sandra and our dog, and now grandkids too, which is so incredible. And that's one of the great things about this stage of life that I'm in now. But in terms of being in the theater, I found my community in all of these different shows that I got to participate in, as I'm sure you did, in getting to perform in that show.
Yes, that's one of the reasons that I wanted to do this show as well, because reconnecting to theater and meeting theater people again, because that's such a special kind of person. People in theater are, well, sort of, I can feel a true connection with, because they sort of understand my way of thinking more.
Yeah, I think so. Theater requires vulnerability. It requires that you are emotionally open. The rule number one of acting is tell the truth. Tell the truth. Get as close to the truth as you can. Of course, you're playing a character. Of course, it's a made up scenario. You could be playing an actual living character. You could be playing an ex-president, an ex-prime minister, and we know in the audience, we know you're not really that person, but it's much more fun to believe that you are, and as truthful as you can be. That's where the real kicker of the journey comes in. That was my goal with Phantom, with everything that I have been lucky enough to try to do, is just, you want to give a performance that allows the audience to say, oh, I know what that feels like. I've been there. I know that they can absorb a truthful situation and lose themselves in the story, even though in the back of our minds, we all know it's a play. Of course it's a play. Of course it's a film. It's something that's a created reality. But if we can really dive in and believe, then it's fun. That's the escapism part of it. When we actually stop the monkey mind of our own fears and worries and troubles and just dive into somebody else's story and get involved and go, oh, I see myself in this story.
I think a lot of actors create their own backstory for the people that they play. Have you done that for Phantom or other characters?
I have. I mean, I didn't go too far with the Phantom stuff because there have been so many versions of this, and there, it's like which version do you want to believe? Like if you look at just the films alone, there are so many adaptations. How was he born this way? Did it happen to him? There's that. Oh, what's the crazy rock and roll version of this? The Phantom of the Paradise, I think it's called. That one. And actually, there's actually a lot I love about that film. It's crazy and weird and strange. But in that version, he's not born with his face the way it is. It's done to him in the time, and so it becomes a much more of a revenge kind of thing. So there's so many different ways to go and directions to go, but I think so I invested in the truth of what this particular story is, and I did lean heavily on the Gaston Leroux novel. What really helped me honestly was the character of the Persian, which is not in the musical version, but who shows up and explains to everyone at the opera house, is like, this is who this guy is and this is how he did this. Come back around here. Like that time he disappeared, this is the mechanism that he used to do it. And, so having an opportunity to see how the magic is being done gave me a really strong sense of what kind of person is this, that he would build all this apparatus over years to continue to empower himself, to have the illusion to fool people that he may in fact be a ghost. We can't prove it until everything comes crashing down.
Well, I think it's interesting that in most adaptations, he actually murders more people than in a novel, because most of these are accidents, and that's at least what happens in the opera.
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought that was a really important thing to bring to the character. I mean, this is one of the greatest characters an actor can have the chance to play, because he's so complex. He's so many things. He is a child. He is a loveless child at his core. He is a loveless child. So what has that done to him? It's made him vindictive. It has made him desperate. It has made him willing to do anything to get what he wants, what he needs to get his way. And he's a murderer. He's, this is a psychopathic murderer. And that is, I felt like I couldn't just play the romantic part of this character and not have that present in the sense of danger that this character can have, because he does kill people, and it impacts the totality of who he is. I think it's part of why the show is a tragedy. There are versions, the sequel Love Never Dies, which imagines far later another relationship, a reborn relationship between the Phantom and the possibility of maybe there was a child, all of those kinds of things. To me, because those versions were not a part of the canon at the time that I played the role, the tragedy to me of all of it was that there's really no hope of a relationship between the Phantom and Christine. He's not capable of living in society. He's simply not. She hasn't that another, quote the script again, this great line that Christine has, "This haunted face holds no horror for me now. It's in your soul that the real distortion lies." And that's true. He's not going to be rehabilitated into society, this guy. He's a mess. We're all a mess. But what she does teach him is he is a mess who is worthy of love and perhaps capable of love. He certainly feels love for Christine. I think one of my favorite things about playing the role is in so many ways, it's very clear what he wants. You know, many characters that you play, they want a lot of different things and it's complicated. The Phantom wants Christine. He wants Christine. He's, you know, the other stuff he's kind of already got when the story's got. He's got the opera house under his thumb. He's, you know, he does get to force them to do his opera and those kind of things. But it's really, she's the object of his desire. And that's very linear. That's a very straightforward thing to play. And you just deal with all the obstacles that get in the way of that, you know. But it's pure also. It's really pure to be able to play something that's, he just wants the girl. He just wants Christine.
What I find so interesting in the difference between the novel and the musical is that in a novel, he absolutely doesn't want to have Christine hearing his music, while in the musical, he desperately wants her to perform his music.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think to bring it to life on the stage in this way and to musicalize the show, you know, you can't really bring music to life on the page. It's going to be through people's past experience of it. But when you've got, you know, when you've got the music of Andrew Lloyd Webber, I mean, come on, this is stuff. This is undeniable stuff. Kristen Blodgett, who was the musical supervisor in New York for pretty much the entire run of the show, conducted the show many, many times. And she's done other Andrew Lloyd Webber. She and I actually met for the first time when I was doing Joe Gillis on Sunset Boulevard's national tour. She says of this music, she said, there's just something about it. She said, it vibrates at a different frequency than anything else in the world. That this is whatever Andrew was channeling when he composed this music, it's remarkable and unique and special. And you can't argue with its longevity. I mean, you know, people walk down the aisle to All I Ask of You. It's embedded in people's lives. And as Sandra and I continue to travel the country and talk about the show and talk about our experiences with it, people really, their favorite part of I think what we do is at the end when we get to meet with them and they get to share their experiences of what the show means to them. Taking their daughter to the show for the first time and watching her watch the show, taking an elderly parent and having a memory of it being one of the last things that they got to do together and how magical and how special it was. And as I said, how the music, people carry it out into their own lives. They'll have it as part of a wedding ceremony or celebrations. And it's quite an honor to have spent a portion of my life as part of something of such magnitude, and to also have had the gift of meeting my life partner in this crazy, weird, romantic way on this show, playing these characters and bringing them to life, and have been a gift that I am eternally grateful for, and just humbled and honored to have been a part of this show.
It's been so wonderful to perform these roles, and then there must have been extreme chemistry when you play together.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. We, you know, was lucky enough to perform with several different Christines, and Sandra, of course, over 10 years of doing the role, had a lot of different phantoms, you know, but there is something really, really special when we step into these roles, and I think it's in the writing, all of that, but somehow when we become the vessels for it, there's something about that chemistry that really, even to this day, as we still perform it, comes to life, and that people note, and it's wow, that chemistry between you guys is something else, and it's the chemistry of our lives too. You know, she's the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I'm just grateful for the chance to spend my life with her. She's an amazing, amazing person. I'm a lucky man.
Absolutely wonderful. We also did the Maury Yeston Phantom. What is the biggest difference for you in that role?
I got to do that one twice. I did it once for a theater in Salt Lake City, Utah, the Pioneer Theater, which is a lovely theater, Broadway-sized house, and big and they do very elaborate productions. And then I did it again just before I started the Book of Mormon. I did it again for the Pittsburgh Civic Light Opera, another wonderful theater. The difference with CLO is they do things very fast. You have a very short rehearsal period for them. You do, I think we had a week of rehearsals and then a week of performances on that, which was really, really quick. But of course, you have all your prep time and everything to do this. And because I had done the role before, I had a strong sense of what I wanted to do with it. I like to try to find a marriage between the two of them in some ways when I do the Yeston Kopit Phantom, because it's really nice with that version to have this the Kopit script it lays out a lot of stuff, and we get this relationship with the father, which is so different and so valuable. Most of the story, I hope I'm not spoiler alert. If you haven't seen that version, the Phantom's father is a character in it, which he discovers at the end of the show. So now I've ruined the show for you. But which is very different from the Lloyd Webber version, where we know nothing of his parents other than his brief mention of his mother, this face which earned a mother's fear and loathing. Brief but potent. I mean, what a thing to imagine, this face which earned a mother's fear and loathing. That tells you a lot about what life was like for this guy, and why he became the person that he did. The Kopit version lays out a lot more stuff, and he has a lot of dialogue. So we get to hear the Phantom speak much more. He has a sense of poetry that's written into the text. It's just a fascinating version to get to play. And essentially, I think I have played them as in the same way. They're the same guy to me, regardless of which version I'm doing. But they have quirks that are able to show up in the Yeston Kopit version, which I find really, really fun and fascinating. He really gets to maneuver back and forth based on his mood, based on who he's talking to, from this childlike guy to this dangerous, controlling, murderous, powerful guy. The character of Carlotta is very different in that version as well, and he has a very menacing. He ultimately is responsible for, again, spoiler alert, he is responsible for her death in that version. So we get this sense of, like, as an actor, what a brilliant thing to get to play someone who in one scene we see him murder someone responsible for someone's death, and in the very next scene he's childlike and he's wanting to woo Christine and show her this magical kingdom, this garden that he's created where they have a picnic down in the basement, and it's weird and strange and beautiful and tragic and vulnerable. It really was a joy to get to play that version. And I really loved how physical that version was too. Again, more spoilers. At the end, there's a great chase sequence with the Phantom escaping from people, and he swings across the stage on a rope, and there's falls. I've always really loved physical roles, and I really loved getting to bring that part of him to life. And there's a sword fight too, he's, which I had, one of my other shows that I was lucky enough to get to do was the Scarlet Pimpernel, which had great sword fight sequences. And it was really sort of fun to have that side of the Phantom to explore too. He's this sort of Byron-esque romantic figure, and he's this murderous guy. And the other thing that's fun about that version too is he wears different masks, he wears different capes. We sort of see him almost more like an actor, where he's playing all these different sides of himself and appearing in different ways to Christine, as opposed to the other version where it's very much that staid model. But again, they created an iconic model, so why would you mess with it? the half mask was such a brilliant idea of a way to bring this character to life and give him that kind of romance, that Valentino-esque quality. So I love both versions. I mean, I think they're just so super fun, and each one is a great challenge for an actor. Vocally different, I think. The Yeston Kopit version is a little more baritone-y, slightly lower range, and of course the Webber version leans much more into a tenor quality.
How did you fall in love with music and theater?
That's so interesting. Thank you for asking that question. When I was a kid, I was really into superheroes. You can see I've got some superheroes on the wall behind me here. That's a painting by Alex Ross of the Justice League. And I grew up with comic books and loving superheroes and the old Superman TV series, the old one with George Reeves. And one of the things I loved about that character so much was this sense of a dual identity, that he was playing a role. You know, when he was Clark Kent, he was playing a role. He was pretending to be someone that in fact he's not. It's sort of the reverse of Batman. Well, people would argue this differently if you get into with comic enthusiasts, but in layman's terms, Batman is the creation and Bruce Wayne is the real guy. Some people would argue it's actually the opposite, that he's really Batman and that Bruce Wayne is the put on. But with Superman, Clark Kent's the put on. It's a created identity and a set of behaviors to distract people from the possibility that he could be Superman, and to give him the opportunity to actually have a normal life, because he wouldn't have a normal life if he walked around in his blue tights and his red cape all the time. People would always need or want something from him, or be, starstruck or whatever. So he created this identity so that so he could walk among normal people. And I loved that idea. There's costumes involved, and so in a lot of ways, theater was like the leap to sort of my way of getting to sort of be a superhero, to pretend to be other people. And then I just kind of fell in love with the true game of it. I mean, if we really go into make-believe, which we live in a society where that's so much a part of who we are. It used to be, as a kid, you'd reach a certain age where people would say, okay, it's time to put away your toys and grow up and get a real job and be responsible and start learning how to be a member of society. All of that, of course, is true. But now we live in a society where cosplay is huge. People hold on to their childhood dreams and they keep them alive. Properties like Harry Potter, like all the Marvel movies, like all the forthcoming DC movies, is about us holding on to our childhood dreams. And I think that's fantastic. I love that. I love what that's done for us as a society. We're much more fun than we used to be because we play more. We've learned the value of play. And acting, to me, is playing. It can be serious play. You can explore a lot of dark emotions, and to tell a truthful story, you have to be vulnerable. You have to explore sadness. You have to explore a lot of dark stuff. But in the end, it is play. It is, it's a big what if. And I think that's what I love the most about it and what I've always loved about it. But growing up where I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and I didn't have a ton of opportunities there. So I got really lucky in my high school years. There was a performing arts high school in Cincinnati, and I had always been 1 year too old to go to the school. And in a random act that happened that year, because they had to increase their enrollment, they added 2 years, and all of a sudden it was possible for me to go to that school. And it changed my life. Again, the sense of community. I always felt like an outcast growing up because I didn't have an arts community. I took dance classes. That was the closest that I could get to that. I took 1 day a week, I would take dance classes on the other side of town. And for the recitals of that, my teacher encouraged me to sing, and I started singing that way too. That was what really got me started singing. I had done one play. I did Rumpelstiltskin when I was a little kid, and I played Rumpelstiltskin. I think I was the only boy in the class, and I we were having the auditions for the show, and again, I had no experience of anything. You know, I was about 9 years old, 10 years old, I think, and the teacher told everybody about, you know, so we're going to do this play. It's Rumpelstiltskin, and there are these main characters here and that, but then there are going to be these other people in the show that sell balloons and go around and change the scenes and do all these things. And I thought, oh, that sounds really cool. That's what I want to do. That's what I want to sell balloons. That's going to be my gig, you know. And I went home and told my mom about it, and she said, well, wouldn't you want to play Rumpelstiltskin? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, that's never going to happen. I can't play Rumpelstiltskin. It's impossible. And she said, no, I think you could do it. I think you'd be really good at it. And I said, well, I'd have to learn lines and memorize. It's got so many lines. There's no way I could do that. And she said, well, I'll help you. I'll help you. We'll work on it together, and I'll help you learn the lines. And she did. And we sat on the couch, you know, she would help me memorize the lines. And I swear that was her faith in me and her bringing out in me a sense that I could accomplish that, changed the entire trajectory of my life. I would never have been able to do any of the roles that I got to go on and do if it hadn't been for that one moment of her just saying, you got this. I'll help you. I'll be there with you. And that changed my life. That was the beginning of a career into theater. And I just have been kind of stupid lucky for the rest of my life to get to do a lot of really cool parts.
A wonderful memory, such a wonderful start to have a supportive family, because sometimes parents don't.
Yeah. And I think that's such a challenge for people to overcome when you don't have that kind of support. I think to do anything in the arts, you know, you need support. Artists need patrons. They need people that believe in them, that support them, sometimes financially, but probably more than anything emotionally, to just say, look, I believe in you. You can do this. You know, keep going. You've got this. Especially when you do this professionally, you know, the level of rejection is real. It's no joke. It is no joke. You face rejection 1,000 times a day. It's almost gotten harder, I think, with since the pandemic, with most auditions now being self-tapes and sending things in. The beauty of that is I live in San Diego, California, which has a lot of great theater, but I would not call it a theater center. And I do think it's important for actors, when you're actively pursuing a career, to live in a theater center. You should be in LA, you should be in New York, you should be in Chicago, you should be in one of the, you know, you should be in London, you know, the cities where the opportunity is there. Being able to self-tape has shifted that a little bit, and it does make it possible for me to still have opportunities and not have to fly to New York every time I want to audition for something. Yes. Which is, you know, it's a big commitment, especially I'm on the West Coast, so I'm quite a ways away from New York. But but I miss that being in the room thing of auditioning. I still think that's the greatest way to connect, is to just be in the same room with the creative people and meet them and feel that energy of the room. It also helps you know, is this a project I want to be a part of? You get a vibe, you know, from being with the creatives and figuring out, yeah, I'm into this, or that, you know, I'm not so sure this is the right fit for me. So the changes in the technology and in the industry have broadened the base of possibilities for casting directors for all of that. But I miss, you know, physically being in the room to audition for things. That was the old school way that I grew up with, and I loved it. I found it really fun to do that.
I think indeed the easy part is not going there, but I think it can help when a director can say, well, we want to see this or that, because when you self-tape, you sometimes might miss a clue that you could come.
Yeah. No, it's very, very true. The best directors, there are a lot of very sort of hands-off directors who will kind of let you do whatever. But the best directors can say one thing to you, and it can shape the entire direction of your performance. I can think of numerous times when somebody would just say, a director would say, just think about this. Think about this one thing, you know. Um, the example I love to give, I was doing a production of The Fantastics, El Gallo, which is a character that I have done many times in my career, and I love playing that role. It's a great role. But the last production of it that I did, the director said, you know, he's the narrator and he's the bandit and he's all these different things in this show. He said, you know, but I just want you, everything you're doing is great. I just want you to think about one thing. Think about the cost for him. What is the cost? What does he give up? What does he surrender in order to be this character? And it turned the whole thing for me. It created a layer of depth that I had never discovered in the character before, just from that one little sentence. Another director had said that to me about the Scarlet Pimpernel. Initially, my version of the character was very reactive. When someone would give him bad news, he would respond to that bad news and it would take him down and he'd be despondent and you know, had that kind of thing. And this wonderful director said, he said, you know, he's a problem solver and he does it by always playing positives. And he never takes bad news and surrenders to it. He takes bad news and says, I can fix this. I can solve that. And it created a buoyancy, a positiveness to the character that was so much more fun to play. And when he really did despair, it was more moving and more costly because he was someone who did not allow himself to go there, because he was always, I can fix this, I can fix this problem, I can solve this problem, I can solve this problem, until he gets to the point where he goes, I can't solve this. And at that moment, his friends rally and lift him up the way he's been lifting him up through the entire show. And it was I believe, to me, it felt like it was much more moving, because it was a more real type of behavior. Just little moments like that, you know. That's why we need directors. It's why we need the creatives. We need people to give us feedback and say, just steer your ship in this direction, and I think you'll find it a much more exciting sail.
What was it like to perform Scarlet Pimpernel?
Say that again. I didn't quite hear your question.
What was it like for you to perform Scarlet Pimpernel?
It was such an interesting experience, because it was two-sided. It was an interesting story about getting to play a dream role. It was, at that time, it was the first time I'd actually had my name above the title on a show. Ron Bohmer and Carolee Carmello and Mark Kudish starring in The Scarlet Pimpernel. That was crazy. I was like, I can't believe this is happening. And it was amazing for me that my mother was still alive at the time, and it was just such a thrill that she got to come to my Broadway opening in that show and experience all of that. And I loved the role. It was just the greatest role. It was really fun. It was my first major show after Phantom. And Phantom is dark. Phantom is heavy. I took a lot of the heaviness of Phantom home with me every night, which I think surviving that show in a long run is, I wouldn't recommend taking the darkness home with you. I would say you got to learn how to turn that off and leave it on the stage, you know. But I was very invested, as I had said before, about the Phantom, about wanting all of the parts of who he was to be present in the show. He's, you know, yes, he's romantic, and yes, he's a composer, and he's a genius and all these things, but he's also a psychopathic murderer. So all of those extremes have to be in the playing of it. And it was exhausting. It's an exhausting role. It's crazy. People often say, well, he's only on stage for, you know, 25 minutes or something like that. It is true, but what a 25 minutes, and you never stop. You know, you've got all that makeup on, you've got the latex cap, so you're sweating and you're hot all the time. You're just dying. There's constant maintenance on the makeup. You're changing costumes. You're climbing up different things to create the illusions that we see in the show. You know, he appears in the proscenium. Well, how do you think he gets up there? There's not an elevator. That's you climbing ladders and getting up there and doing all of that stuff. It's a, you know, it was a very, and I pushed the boundaries on that role to make him more physical, as I often do with roles. I felt like he should be able to express himself physically as well. So there was a violent edge to what I did. It was exhausting. It was a lot. But loved it. It was loved doing it.
The final layer of
It's crazy. It's insane. It's everything happens in that. Everything happens. He goes from the height of his maniacal destructiveness to his complete, most destroyed and open-hearted vulnerableness. And on top of that, sings really high and, you know, hits all these high notes to, you know, and then has to disappear and all of those things. So it was a lot. It was exhausting, but a gift, but it was a challenging gift. And Scarlet Pimpernel was the antithesis of that. It was a huge role on stage pretty much the entire show. And you didn't have you had the wig, the period clothes, and all those different things, lots of costume changes, but he was funny. You know, it's a lighter show. There's heartache. He spends a huge portion of the show believing that his newlywed wife has betrayed him and that their marriage is destroyed. So there's a dark edge to it, but it's mostly intended to be funny. The Pimpernel, not unlike Clark Kent and Superman, he begins to create this persona of himself as a person, as what they call a fop. He's a dandy, he's fancy, he cares more about fashion than anything, in order to persuade everyone that he could not possibly be this hero who's rescuing people from the guillotine, because all he cares about is himself. He's vain and he's ridiculous. And it's a really funny script. It's a lot of fun to do. So I loved it. The songs are great. Frank Wildhorn's score is amazing. I did the show twice. I did the Broadway company, and then I joined the national tour and had great, amazing casts in both cases. That side of it was amazing. The business side of it on that one was hard. I had an audition for the show to replace Douglas Sills, who originated the role, and was basically told at my final audition that I had the job and that it was all going to happen. And 2 days before I started rehearsal, I got a call and they said, no, in fact, it's not happening. It's all Douglas Sills is going to stay, and sorry, it's not going to work out. And it was devastating. And I just thought, well, I'll never ever get to do it. And then 3 or 4 months later, all of a sudden it all changed again. And they said, no, now Douglas Sills is leaving. We're going to move the show to a new Broadway theater. It was at the Minskoff, which is where Lion King is. They were going to move it to the Neil Simon. And they said, you know, and we know who the other 2 stars are going to be. And if you want to do it, you have to audition again. And I was like, oh my God, I got to jump through all these hoops again and maybe have the same thing happen, not get to do it. But in the end, I decided, you know what, I'll always regret it if I don't give it my all and try. So I went in, auditioned again, jumped through all the hoops, and luckily it worked out. But it was challenging, you know, it was emotionally, it was hard to replace another actor in the role who had such a high profile. Douglas was nominated for a Tony for it. He was brilliant. And I was like, shit, excuse me for, you can bleep that. He was so brilliant. I was like, well, what can I do? And I had to sort of really get under the hood and reinvent the role for myself so that I could truly bring my genuine self to it. And it was challenging. So from a business standpoint, there were things about it that were tough, but from the joy of just stepping out on the stage and doing that role, it was magic. I really, really loved it. And in particular, I think because it was such a contrast to the year before that I'd spent playing the Phantom and loving every second of it, but I was able to carry the weight a little differently on Pimpernel, which I liked.
I think it's actually might be easier to have a whole role to play the whole role too, than have to put everything in the scenes that you have as in Phantom.
Yeah, I think it was, you know, another side of it that to your point, I think is you have more of a sense of community in the Scarlet Pimpernel because you interact with a lot more people. In Phantom of the Opera, the Phantom really only interacts with Christine and with Raoul. The you of course you appear in the Red Death. That's really the only group scene that he's actually in. But you don't really you proclaim to them. You bring the score for the opera and you throw it at them. You're covered in the mask. You've got the giant skull mask and all the Red Death stuff on, and you don't really get to interact with other people. So there's a loneliness, I think, also to playing that role, and just in terms of the work itself, that you don't get to toss the ball back and forth as much. It makes the relationship with Christine all that much more important, which, of course, I was really lucky in that regard. Had about the best Christine you can imagine.
I think there was a Dutch Phantom who had heart surgery during his run, and he wore a heart meter during the show. And he said when he did the final layer, it was like he had run a marathon in 20 minutes.
Yeah, I believe it. I think that's really interesting data. Many Broadway things are like that. There was an article in the New York Times, probably been about 7 or 8 years ago now, where they followed some performers in The Lion King and did tests on their endurance and what they were going through. And it was literally, they said, this is the same as what a professional athlete, what a football player is going through. You work very, very hard in these roles, and you work a lot of hours. Like I say, there's a great deal of sacrifice to making the commitment to do this kind of work. If you have any audience members listening or watching that are aspiring to this, I say, your passion for it has to be enormous, because you're going to work your ass off, and you're also going to have times when you don't work and you can't get the gigs, and you have to really desperately want to and love doing this art form, because it does require a lot of sacrifice, but it's such an honor. I mean, as I said, it's to be a part of something like this, where you can really have an emotional impact in people's lives and help deliver these stories to them that change our lives. It's a deep honor. I feel extremely grateful and lucky.
It's a special profession, and I wish theater actually got more recognition in a way that for all the hard work, as you say, because well, there's movie actors who come to theater and they're shocked by how much work there has to be done.
Yeah, it's very different. It's there's a singer-songwriter that I love, a guy named Frank Turner. And if you have never heard of him, or if your audience members have never heard of him, you need to look up Frank Turner and find some of his songs. He wrote a wonderful song called Balthazar Impresario. And it is a song about an unsung hero of the stage, of the music halls, which we don't have the music halls in America. But I had always heard of the art form and appreciated what they do there. And it's a story of this unsung actor who he says, I'm going to try to remember the lyrics now because I wasn't planning to talk about this. My name is Balthazar Impresario. I'm trying to get to the bridge where he really beautifully lays out what the life of an actor is like. He says, we are the fathers of us all. Yeah, but we'll never be famous. We artists. We are something more. I wish I can't quite remember the lyric, but he encompasses the sense of that we're not doing this for fame. You're gonna be unsung in a lifetime in the theater. Even some of my best friends who are considered, the top tier of the Broadway community and of the most people don't know their names. They wouldn't recognize the name. If you said so-and-so, they would say, yeah, I don't know that name. It's not the same kind of fame that you get with the movies and with cinema and with being a rock star, a pop star, all of those kinds of things. But it's never about that, you know. Sure, some of these productions pay very well and you make a lot of money, and I've been lucky to have some of those jobs. I've also done things for nothing, a lot of things for nothing, where you just do something and invest in it just because you love the material. We were talking about Maury Yeston earlier about his version of Phantom. He wrote another show that I did a workshop of. I think I got $200 for it. It was Death Takes a Holiday, and I played Death. It did ultimately get produced, and it's a beautiful, beautiful show. But I got nothing for that, and I worked harder than I did on Phantom on that, you know. But what I gained from that was the joy of playing an amazing role. I was passionate about bringing that character to life. So, you know, there are lots of ways of being paid in life, and they're not all to do with money. You know, being an actor, you have to recognize that a lot of what you're going to get paid in is applause and just the honor and the opportunity to be given the responsibility to bring something new to life.
I do think it's a shame that Death Takes a Holiday never went to Broadway or further, because it's such a beautiful score and a beautiful story.
It's a stunning score, yeah. And I did not ever get to see the eventual off-Broadway production. It went through many iterations and changed creative teams many times. And the creative team that did ultimately bring it to off-Broadway in New York and did get the recording made and all of that was an entirely different team than when I had been involved with it. But it did get done. It did get out there, you know, and that's what we do in this business. You never know what's going to happen. I mean, it was crazy, you know, Maury Yeston writing Phantom of the Opera at the same time that Andrew Lloyd Webber is writing Phantom of the Opera, and it's like, well, which one's going to get done first? And, you know, that's showbiz. Sometimes that kind of stuff happens, you know, but it doesn't diminish, you know, either one of them. I mean, they're both great pieces of art, and how lucky for all of us that we have them both. You know, there's so many versions of Phantom because it's such a great story, and it's really, really fun to explore all of those nuances and differences. So I say, keep writing, bring it on.
There's this really, really beautiful musical version of Phantom from the early 70s by Ivan Jacobs that no one knows, but it's a really beautiful score.
I don't think I know that one. There was a version, I think it was mostly a play, and it had music that was in the public domain in it. There was someone named Ken Hill, I believe, had put together a production and it was touring as Ken Hill's Phantom of the Opera. Very different logo, all of that. You know, the piece was in the public domain, I think, at that point. So, you know, anybody can do, even today, if somebody wanted to write a new version, I think they're free to do so. But it's fascinating to see these stories sort of reinvented, and you know, I love seeing what people do with Sherlock Holmes. I'm a big fan of the Sherlock series with Benedict Cumberbatch and Morgan, not Morgan Freeman. I'm saying it wrong. It's gone out of my head. But the two of them giving a whole brand new spin on these characters, preserving everything that we loved about those original versions, about a brain that can work so fast that can solve all of these things, and also who's addicted to opium, all these different qualities, but what does that look like through today's lens? It's fascinating to watch this stuff. So I love to see people reinvent these classics that we've all fallen in love with.
Yes, in the Ivan Jacobs version, Christine was very different than we usually know. She was really determined, and in the end left the role because she wanted to stay with Erik to focus on her career with him.
Interesting. Yeah, and that's a take that makes sense when you think about it. You can see an artist making the choice of saying, you know what, no, I don't want to be the damsel in this story. I want to have a choice, and I want to have some say over where I go, and I want to be an artist, and I want
Yes.
to, it totally makes sense, aside from the fact that he's a murderous psychopath, but
And then she gets to a big fight with him because Erik can't even believe that she loves him.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's a remarkable piece of this story, is that ultimately, he we're sort of full circle in saying this, and why I think the story has survived the way it has. I think we all feel we're unworthy of that love in some way. We fear that, we're not enough. And she teaches him that he's enough, and it's beautiful.
What were some of your favorite roles other than the ones we discussed?
Oh, wow. I loved playing Enjolras in Les Miserables. That was that's such a great role. Again, it's just like that laser focus on a goal. He is a character that I really saw him as a Joan of Arc. I felt like he honestly believed he was in conversation with God, that God was directing him in the same way that God directed Joan of Arc and said, it's time, you're up. This is what you have to do. You have to do it. And it was just really, really lovely and fascinating to play that. Again, an exhausting show to be a part of. It's a long show. It's 3 hours. I think it was 3.5 when we were doing it. It was before the version that I did on Broadway was they eventually cut it down a bit and made it shorter. So that it wouldn't go into overtime and they didn't have to pay the orchestra extra money and all of this stuff. But yeah, we would do 8 o'clock shows. We'd get out at 11:35. It was crazy. But, again, a community that I love being a part of, working with actors that are lifelong friends. I love doing that. Well, I think probably my favorite of the shows that I've done has to be Sunset Boulevard. I really love playing Joe Gillis. He's complex. He's got that self-loathing thing that the Phantom has, He's hard-edged, but he's vulnerable underneath. And I just loved that he narrates the show. He gets to talk to the audience and create a relationship with them, which I think is really fun as an actor to be in conversation with the audience and then also be in the scenes with people. And it was a spectacular production, just huge. It was the original. I did the original version that Trevor Nunn directed. It's fascinating now to see all these things coming back around, isn't it? Sarah Brightman's doing it now in Australia. The London version, I don't know if they're continuing to run there, but they're opening on Broadway this fall. It's just amazing to see. And I've always held that I think that was probably Andrew's best work as a total show. I loved what a masterful combination of play and music that show is. I just think it's such a great book, and I love the score. I think it's fabulous. And then I have a soft spot for the first one I ever got to do. The role that really launched my career was playing Alex in Aspects of Love, again another Andrew Lloyd Webber show. And I just loved that character and I loved that score. It was a very challenging score to sing night after night, but I loved the extremes. I loved the challenge of that, to bring that to life and to work with other artists that had to be at that same level of challenge. It's one of my favorite things about singing Andrew's scores is everybody works. He demands a lot from his actors and singers, and it's a fun challenge to take on with a group of artists and say, all right, let's do it. Let's get out there and give them the best that we got on this. And I really did enjoy that, singing that score in particular. It's a beautiful, beautiful score. I don't think it's gotten the level of respect that his other work, the recognition that his other work has gotten. And if you're a fan of Webber and you don't know Aspects of Love, you should get under the hood and listen to that one. It's great.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful score. I've always I heard it first that I really zoned into seeing is believing, because I thought it's so beautiful. But over the years I got more and more appreciation for the rest of the score, because well, the instrumentals, for example, of Memory of a Happy Moment, when you move between the scenes, is so glorious.
Oh, it's all of the whole score is
Yes.
really, really quite beautiful. And I think it's interesting the way he wrote it too, because every motif is a reflection of another motif in the show. So they all sort of merge together. There's one of my favorite songs since becoming a father and now a grandfather from that show is Other Pleasures. It's one
Yes.
of George's songs. Other pleasures, and I've known many afternoons in warm Venetian squares. It's just such a beautiful melody. But in some ways, it's also a reflection of love. Love changes everything. Each beginning, each goodbye. They're kind of a mirror of each other, you know. Jenny and Alex sing that beautiful The Mermaid song
Yes.
from it, which is just a glorious melody. And does that thing that Andrew does so well. He goes in those unexpected places. I am a mermaid with golden hair. I've never seen one like you. If you were a sailor and heard my song, would you be lured by me? It's just that walk up that's so beautiful there, you know. And he's a master of that kind of stuff, you know. It's yeah. If you don't know aspects, I mean, you know it, of course, but if your listeners don't know it, get under the hood, listen to that one. It's a great, great score.
Yes, I think that some people say that Andrew repeats things in his musicals, and I think that's the beauty of it, because it gets repeated in different situations, in different the sounds can be different, because it's the emotion that changes throughout. They start to sing a song happy, and then turns in a completely dramatic version near the end.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's
Yeah,
because
I
it's
think it's lovely too because it creates a vernacular, um, a language, if you will, of the unique to the piece, um, and it's wonderful to hear those melodies wrench our heart in different ways at the end of aspects when spoiler alert again, when Alex and Rose are parting for what we believe will be the last time, and she essentially begs him to, to promise to answer a question, and she says, just promise one thing. All right, what is it? You must promise first. He says, I can't. I must know what it is. And she says, don't leave me. She can't stand to be alone. And rather than respond verbally, what we hear is there's a key change, and then we hear Seeing is Believing, which was their song together, suddenly comes out of it in this and at the climax of that is when he actually leaves the room without responding. He breaks down and is weeping because he's wanted his whole life is for her to ask him to stay, and now when she finally does, he can't. And so it's tragedy, and that climax of that beautiful piece of music works so well to remind us of how they started, and also point out the tragedy of, here they are, where they finally could be together, and they're not going to be together. And that's what he can do with melody, which is so beautiful, and I believe has always elevated his stuff and made it such a joy to perform.
I think what he was essentially doing with Phantom aspects and Sunset especially was a sort of modern opera with all these themes recurring, and the dramatics.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's totally modern opera. And it's fascinating to me that really took over, in the 80s and the 90s, that became the form of musical theater for that period of time. Musical theater is always morphing and always changing, and we never quite know where it's going to go. But you see that influence in Hamilton. Hamilton is in many ways a sung through show. It's got book scenes and whatever, but it's this idea of the music never stops. We continue to use the music to propel the story forward. And I love performing that. You know, that's an exciting way to do a show where it's just constantly driven by the orchestra and by the score.
I think that was sort of also with a role you also did with Sunday in the Park with George, where things were turned and driven forward by music and the acting.
Hmm. Very
Yes.
much so. Yeah, that's probably my favorite piece of musical theater ever created. It's a tough one for a lot of audiences because it's challenging. People say, well, "What's the show about?" Well, it's about this painter. Is it? Yes, it is. What it's really about is making art. It's about the act of making art and understanding what that's about. And it's a difficult thing to write about, which makes it a challenging show for a lot of audiences. But I've been mad about the show forever. When I moved to New York, it was playing, and standing room was $10 for it. You could stand at the back of the theater and see it for $10. And I probably saw it 50 times. I just adored that show so much. And about 10 years ago, I finally got the chance to play George. I did a production of it in St. Louis, Missouri. And it was just such a great gift. It was a production that was based on the original production. The set design was similar to that. And it just was one of the highlights of my life to get to bring that material to life, this sense of trying to, finishing the hat is a piece about what it feels like to lose yourself into art and the sacrifices that are involved, how you're always turning back too late from the grass or the stick or the dog or the lights, how the kind of woman willing to wait's not the kind that you want to find waiting to return you to the night, dizzy from the height, coming from the hat. Look, I made a hat where there never was a hat. I'm truncating a little bit, but the act of creating art and how there's a sacrifice and yet it's lonely and yet it's beautiful and it's what we're here. And it also is a beautiful job of, there are many ways to be creative. For Dot, it ultimately comes down to having a child and bringing forth life. That's her act of creation, and her act of inspiring George is an act of creation. It's just such a beautiful show. Again, for your listeners, if you don't know it, Sunday in the Park with George.
I always love that scene with Sunday when he uses the actors to create his painting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's such a genius departure of a way of writing, the way that show is created, to start with a painting and take these characters that are in the painting and say, well, let's give them characters. Who are they? How would they interconnect? And then ultimately have them service the creation by coming together in the painting at the end, as we see it, as you can see it if you visit the Chicago Institute, where it's still hanging. It's just such a brilliant piece to take a character, a shadowy figure in a painting, and say, what if that was George's mother? Another shadowy figure, and say, what if that was another famous painter who could help George but chooses not to? It's such a great piece. Such a great piece.
And calling his mistress Dot because he always paints with dots.
Yeah, even that alone right
Yes.
there is, you're like, what else would she be called? Yeah, it's pretty great.
You recorded several albums. Could you talk about that, how you created them?
Sure. When I was cast in Sunset Boulevard, it was really my first starring role with any traction, and it meant a lot to me at that time to create something of my own to be a companion piece to what I was doing as an actor and as a singer. And I really wanted to do an album, and I was seeking a producer. I was lucky enough to connect with the husband of Kelly James at the time, Kelly James, who famously, she was in Aspects of Love with me, but she was also an Eponine on Broadway, and traveled the country with Donny Osmond as the narrator in
Joseph?
Dreamcoat, yes.
Mhm.
And her husband was a very talented musician, and we got together and produced my first recording. I had never written a song at that time, and I just started playing around with it and really fell in love with the act of doing that. I wrote 3 songs for that record. During Scarlet Pimpernel, I started work on my second record. I knew as Scarlet Pimpernel was beginning to close, I was like, I really want to have a project to work on for this. So I did a live show and fleshed out all of those songs and performed them live, and we recorded it, and that was my second record. And then for whatever reason, I didn't record or write anything for a long time, 20 years, in fact. And during Book of Mormon, I started learning guitar. I'd always wanted to play the guitar, and I'd never been able to do it. And suddenly I had a period of time in my life where I had an hour every day while I'm sitting there in my Joseph Smith costume, where I could pretty much do whatever I wanted until my next cue. And I started learning guitar. And that led me to writing my most recent album, Legacy, which is available now. It was released in 2019. And it's the most autobiographical writing that I've ever done. I really wanted to dive back into my past, into my childhood, and even into the future, and write something that projects my love and admiration for everything that the women in my life have done. My wife, Sandra Joseph, and my daughters. And I wrote a song for that celebrates who they are and what they've contributed to the world. And that's available everywhere. It's all my music's on Spotify. It's on YouTube Music. It's wherever you get your music, you can find Ron Bohmer. Just check it out.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
So much. Thank you so much for this lovely interview.
Yeah, thank you, Dannii. This was fun. Best of luck with the show, and I'm so grateful to you for reaching out to me today.
Thank you. Absolutely wonderful talking to you. It was just great talk.
Behind the Mirror of Music with Dannii Cohen.